for this really important conversation. I am actually going to turn it over. The City Council is all on tonight, as are many of our city staff members. And City Council had asked Councilmember Lay and Councilmember Dickinson to take the lead in organizing this for us this evening. So I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Lay for introductions.
Thanks, Mayor. Very happy to be here tonight. We have a really important national conversation going on right now about issues relating to racial equity. And in Louisville, we have gotten feedback on the council that people in the community want to have a conversation around these issues and to have us have a sort of listen and learn from folks that are going to be able to teach us in the community about these issues. Caleb?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I just wanted to, on behalf of all City Council and our staff, just I'm thrilled and honored to welcome Dr. Nita Mosby Tyler. She is the catalyst, I think it's a chief catalyst and founder of the Equity Project, which is just an amazing group. And I hope people will check out that group after this conversation. But without further ado, I just want to turn it over to you, Doctor. So go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all of the council persons. I appreciate this community for embarking upon this work and for inviting me to be a part of your beautiful system. You are all right in your sentiments about what a complex time in history it is. I appreciate the fact that you recognize that it's complex and there is this need to go into community dialogue about how we thrive in a system like this, in a time like this, and how we work together to have that happen. So thank you again for tonight, and for the community that has gathered. Thank you as well. Let me just talk a bit about why we're here tonight. This is an interesting forum, but a very important forum for us in that the council wants to be in a position to hear from the community. It's not a decision-making night, it's a listening night. And I don't know about you, but that's one of the hardest things for me to do, is reserve what I want to say and reserve that I want to do something and simply open space for listening. So tonight really is all about listening, hearing your voice, hearing your opinions, and taking it all in so that we might be informed for next steps. So I'm going to be asking you to do a series of things. One of which is to talk. I think you have an option to raise your hand electronically, and would love to hear your voice in some of the questions that I'll be asking tonight. Also, there's an opportunity for you to engage with the chat room to answer questions as well. We want a good balance of both. It's healthy to actually hear your voice, but if there are those of you that feel more comfortable just typing it in, please do that as well. I want you to know that I know you're just meeting me, but I have a really important philosophy about how this work works. My work is in the areas of racial equity, equity at large, diversity, inclusion, and equality, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And I feel really fortunate that I have an organization where I can shape the framework around how we do our work. So I just want to share one thing with you tonight. We have an hour and a half to be together, so I think you should know a little bit about how I do this work since you're just meeting me. I use a philosophy that I feel very strongly about, and that philosophy is called spaces filled with grace. Now, that's just a big fancy word that says it matters a great deal to me in my work that we make room for everyone's voice. I know you've heard of safe spaces. We've all used that before, and there's nothing wrong with saying safe spaces. I don't know what safety means for people, so I typically shy away from using it. But I do know what grace means and what a space filled with grace means, and I wanted to define it for you. So, a space filled with grace is simply a space that allows people to show up wholly and fully who they are, just like you, just like tonight's setting. Unapologetically who you are. But you get to learn and grow together. You get to make mistakes. You even get to admit, I don't know what the heck we're talking about. You get to fail in some cases and get back up and grow and learn and try it again. And you get to do all of that without fear of being judged and critiqued. That's my platform for my work. We talk about really hard things at the Equity Project, like race and inequities, but we do it in a space filled with grace so that we can get all voices heard and engaged in the process. That's the process tonight, too. So I wanted you to know that. So I thought I would start with this image. I think it's an important image for us to ground our night in. It's a metaphor to remind us that this in many ways is what's happening right now. So I want to engage you right now on something, if you don't mind. I want to ask you to type something in the chat room. And that's something that I'd like to ask you to type in the chat room is, I want you to caption this image. What is this image saying to you? So if I could just get you, if you don't mind, to start typing in the chat room, if you can, what is this image actually saying to you? I want you to just caption it. And I think the first person that does it wins a new car or something like that. I just made that part up, but it sounds great. So if you can type in the chat room what it means to you or how you would caption it, that would be great. And it looks like we might have to check on the chat. It's showing that the chat room is disabled. So if I can get the team to take a look at the settings on that and enable it, that would be great. When it gets enabled, if you would just go there and type away. I'm starting to see some chats right now. We're all in this together, but we don't always realize it. So keep typing those in as you go, and I'll just keep going here. This image is an interesting one. I don't know about you, but almost my whole life I've heard that we're all in the same boat. I don't know that I always believed it, but this image reconciled that for me. It shows me that maybe we are all in the same boat, but there is a different lived experience that's happening in the boat depending on where you sit. And that is the consciousness that we have to have in our communities is maybe, just maybe, where we sit in the boat is not where everybody else sits in the boat, yet the boat is one boat. That's the consciousness we need to be thinking about. So as we proceed tonight, I just want you to recall this image. It's a very important one for us to be thinking about. Hey, if we don't get the chat room enabled, then maybe you can use the Q&A function. I think it would just be really important for you to be able to type in how you're thinking about this. Sometimes we also have to think about this as we think about racial equity. Sometimes it's even close to home. And that's a reason to think about it. I thought I would share with you on a real personal level a picture of my great-grandmother, Mamie Jackson. Her mother was born into slavery. And my great-grandmother, Mamie, was a domestic worker her whole life. She was a maid. And she worked for generations of the same family her whole life. My point here is sometimes it's really close to home because slavery actually wasn't that long ago. Or it could be an image like this that sparks something in us. This is an image of Atlanta, Georgia. That's actually where I grew up. And I've got a big blue arrow pointing there. If you can look at that image very closely, you'll see a storefront. And the storefront says auction and Negro sales. Now I want you to sit with that for a minute. Here's a storefront that sold and auctioned people that looked just like me, that were my ancestors. And if you look around that little shopping center, you'll see all kinds of stores. I mean, you could literally go upstairs and buy some china and glass as you're buying a human being. I want you to know the gravity of that. Interestingly, this area of Atlanta wasn't that far from where I grew up. Every time I went to this area, there was something in my soul and my heart that thought about this storefront, that not so long ago, my ancestors were being sold just like the store right upstairs, glass and china. This is the reason we must talk about racial equity and realize that it is in absolute proximity to where we are today. So I want to start with this. I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. We are in the middle of two pandemics, maybe even more, but two that I know of for sure. And one of them is COVID-19, and one of them is the pandemic of racial injustice. These two pandemics have come together and converged in powerful ways where one shines the light on the other. It's complex for all of us. So I have a question for you, and this is one that I would love you to get unmuted, raise your hand, and just share out loud with us. It's so important that we share this as a community. And that is, how have these two pandemics coming together, how have they impacted you, shifted you, changed who you are, even changed your leadership? So I'm trying to hear you talk about the impact of the two pandemics. So that's the question. How have these two pandemics coming together impacted you, shifted you, changed you? Let us know that. So I'm going to sort of watch for anybody that would be willing to raise their hand or chime in verbally so we can hear your voice.
I'm going to unmute. It says it's Kate Hope and Stephen Tubbs.
Thank you so much. Go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Kate. The question is poignant, and it to me it boils down to, it stripped away all that didn't matter and got us focused on what matters. That's it.
Yeah. Kate, I could not agree with you more. I thought I knew what mattered until this happened, and it reprioritized my entire life. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for that.
I'm going to unmute Rita Albright.
Thank you. Thank you, Rita. Go right ahead.
What comes to mind when you say about the COVID and racial injustice converging is, for me, a real tangible awareness that I thought I had control over my life and thought I was pretty well informed. And this has helped me realize that just waking up in the day and every day is a blessing. And I'm reminded of Renee Brown. She shares one of her mantras, that it's so important to me to get it right, not be right. And I think in the past, it was important to be right.
Wow.
So that's what my response is.
Thank you so much, Rita. How powerful. Let's get it right. What an opportunity, too. Thank you for that.
I'm going to unmute. I think it's KV.
Go right ahead.
So you need to unmute on your end. You've been allowed to speak. KAIVI. There you go.
Okay. So thank you. The way I look at it right now is we have the time to ponder things. If we did not have the pandemic, we would probably be too busy with our lives and we would not see it because it has always been there around us, but was never seen. And somehow the two roads kind of met is how I look at it.
Yes, thank you for that. And I appreciate the point that you're making that this isn't new. It's been there all the time. You know, it takes me back to that image of the boat that I just shared with you, that sometimes, depending on where we were in the boat, that's all we saw is our part of the boat. But that other part of the boat was always happening. We just weren't paying attention to it or didn't notice it or didn't think we had to. I really appreciate your comment there. Thank you for that.
Next in the queue is Allison McDougall.
Thank you, Allison. Go right ahead.
Yes, hi everyone, thank you. When I think about these two pandemics converging, the thing that I think that I have been thinking about and struggling the most with has been health, physical health, emotional health, mental health. And when I say health, I think about it from two different, I guess, facets, both being at the individual level as well as the collective, and getting it right. Absolutely, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown myself, but I think it's finally time to focus on the individual and the collective health from all of those different angles. Whole body, whole mind, whole soul health.
Mm-hmm. Allison, I agree with you. I'm so glad that you wrapped this into our well-being. We can't thrive if we're sick. And if we're sick all the way through in all the ways that you described, how do we then create rich and vibrant communities when the ingredients are ill? So thank you for raising that and how comprehensively we ought to be looking at this too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You all are going to make me move to Louisville, I'm telling you.
You should.
Love you already.
Next in the queue is Keely.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. One thing that has an awareness that has awakened in me is, as a white woman, most of my identity is representative of dominant culture. And so I walk around so in my community in the world without an awareness necessarily or a thought of how people will perceive me or respond to me. And with COVID, with masks and distancing, and there is now this layer of stress and confusion and not always being able to expect how someone will respond or react or perceive me and my actions. And I have wondered if and so there is this layer of stress that doesn't go away, and I have wondered if that is what people of color, especially in our white communities, are walking around without COVID, if just not knowing how people will respond to them, how they will be received, what will happen, just a guard that they always have to carry, an added stress that is carried always.
Keely, I so thank you for what you just said. And, you know, I was just talking to a colleague of mine the other day, and I said, what do you do when you wake up in the morning? And she said, oh, I brush my teeth and I comb my hair. And I said, well, I do that too. But then I enter right into just making sure I'm acceptable, making sure that I meet a criteria, or making sure that I'm always on my game. And those are things that I think of before I even open my front door to leave for work.
Right.
It's not the same set of standards, I think, Keely, is what you're talking about there. Is that, am I following you?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. Such an important consideration too.
Next in the queue is Jorge.
Great, go right ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Great. Actually, this is a good segue because I wanted to share a story of something that actually happened to me here in Louisville when I
Mhm,
used to live in Louisville as a house owner.
mhm,
I had been profiled in a way that made me feel like really uncomfortable. Every time I wore a red North Face jacket by the police in ways that made me feel like I was a criminal.
mhm,
And at that point, I had worked as an advisor for like 15 governors, had been like research faculty uh, at CU Law School. But I was a young, confident person of color
mhm,
using a red North Face jacket, and it triggered certain policemen, not all, in ways that made me feel like really uncomfortable. To the
mhm,
point in which I was living in Louisville, and I had to wake up early. I had to go walk to the park and ride at about 4:30 in the morning because I had to take a bus, the AB bus, to the airport at about like 5, and I only had like half an hour to get to the park and ride. And
mhm,
before I left, I wanted to wear the red North Face jacket, and I was like, well, if I wear this jacket, I'm gonna be stopped by the police. And
mhm,
so, yeah, I don't have a lot of time, so I might miss my bus. So maybe I shouldn't wear the jacket. And then I was like, wait a minute. Why can't I wear this? Is like my favorite jacket. Why can't I wear this jacket? I want to wear this jacket. And so I decided to wear the jacket. But I took an envelope that was addressed to my home so that if the police stopped me, I could just give them my ID, show them that I live there here in the community, and leave within, a matter of 5 minutes and not miss my bus. So it's really sad that I had to go through all these mental safety checks in order to make sure I wouldn't leave my bus. And so I could wear my favorite jacket in the city of Louisville right now. Well, that was in 2012.
yeah, but not
So I
that.
left, I went on a walk, and when I got to McCaslin Boulevard, a cop car like started going pacing me about less than 5 miles per hour with this huge like fog light on my face, and I was ready, to stop and give them my information, but at the same time I was like really upset and really angry.
Well, Jorge,
But
let me say something
I
to
decided,
you.
I'm almost done
I,
with my story. I decided to just not look at them,
yeah.
and I had a fog light for about in my face, in my eyes, as I was walking from the cop car for about a mile, and that was like really a very long mile for me.
Mhm,
They didn't stop me. They probably didn't have any reasonable suspicion to stop me, but it was a very aggressive behavior by the police in my community, and it made me feel not to trust the police. And I want to share this with you and with my community here in Louisville, so that you guys can also get a glimpse of, some of the realities that some people of color face in the city of Louisville.
yes. Jorge, I want to thank you for being vulnerable enough to share your story. It's not an easy story to tell, I'm sure. I am sorry that it happened to you. No human being deserves that. And at the same time, what you've raised for us is why we have to keep talking about this and acknowledging that implicit bias and explicit bias, conscious and unconscious bias, is happening every day in every one of our systems. And the targets for that bias most often are people that are already marginalized. And the description of what you just shared are the kinds of things we've got to start tackling. It is not okay that you have to second guess wearing your favorite jacket, or that you have to second guess being at a bus stop. It is not okay that in our communities, we have some of us that have to think about 13 different things before we make a move versus just making a move. So I appreciate you sharing that story. I know that we have people in the queue to share. I want you to stay queued up because there's so much more we need to talk about, and I don't want to stay on this topic too long. So I want to move to one more thing on this particular topic, thanking each of you for sharing how these convergences have impacted you. I do want you to know that so much of what you just described it has a name, and we're all in it, and it's a thing called grief. I think it's important to name what we're in. I am filled with hope about all kinds of things, but the reality is what we're in is in grief, because the reality for us is the world as we once knew it is changed. We don't know exactly what it will be, but we will know that it's not going to be what it was just a few months ago. And I want you to know that it's in a cycle called grief that we're sitting in. So if you look at this cycle, you'll probably recognize some steps in the cycle because you may have been in those steps. I don't know about you, but when COVID-19 first hit, I was in the denial stage. I think I went 2 weeks just not believing we were in a pandemic. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that we were quarantining and businesses were closing. I was in denial. When the George Floyd murder happened, I went to anger. I was hostile and really irritated. First of all, I just couldn't believe I was watching it on TV. So now I was in between both denial for COVID-19 and anger on George Floyd. And then a couple of weeks later, I found myself in the depression stage where I just felt helpless and hopeless and really overwhelmed. About a month ago, I started shifting into this space. I didn't even know how to name it then, but it was called bargaining. And it was the first time that I started trying to make meaning out of what was going on. I was reaching out to other people and hearing about their stories, and I was telling my own stories. And then there's the next stage, which is acceptance. This is where there's a new plan in place and you've moved on. Well, I don't know what the new plan is, and I haven't moved on, so I know I'm squarely in bargaining right now. I wanted you to know about this because I do want you to start thinking about where you are in this cycle of grief, knowing that it is quite possible for you to go backwards too. If there's another event, or if something happens in your life or for your family or in your community, you could go from one spot backwards to the other spot. I want you to pay attention to that because I care about you and I care about community. If you look at the bottom of this slide, you'll see this blue bar down there. What it's telling you is these are the things that you need as support systems depending on where you are in the cycle. So if you're at denial and anger, what it's saying is you need more information and communication. You need data, you need facts. That's what helps you out of denial and anger. Emotional support is what it's suggesting you need if you're in depression. Now, emotional support could be you need friends and family and colleagues, or it could mean you need mental health support. It's on a range of things that you might need for emotional support. And then if you're at bargaining and acceptance, what it's saying is you need more guidance and direction, meaning it would benefit you if you had more of a leadership voice guiding what we're doing and where we're going. So a part of tonight is for us to reconcile how we're feeling, obviously, but at the same time, what you're saying actually gets us into the bargaining and acceptance phase of what's going on in the world, meaning we're going to shape with direction from leadership and collective work from all of you what our new plan is and how we move on. So I wanted you to know that the grief cycle would be an important thing for us to think about. Now, really quickly, and then I'm going to open this up for us to just have some dialogue. I do think it's important to understand the what we're doing and the what we're talking about all over the country. And I get to do this work all over the country. I live in Denver, but the work is everywhere. we're using a lot of words. These are 4 words that we use a lot. And there are more words. There's social justice, there's fairness, there's all kind of stuff. But these 4 words are where oftentimes the work gets grounded. There's diversity work where we talk about differences. There's inclusion work where we talk about belongingness. There's equality work where we talk about level setting and getting people up to the same levels and standards. And then there's that word equity that we keep hearing a lot. There's equity, and deeper than that is racial equity. So I wanted you to know that the big focus right now is in that area of equity. It doesn't make the other 3 words go away. As a matter of fact, it calls for us to do better jobs with those other 3 words. If you think about this slide, those first 3 words are really the tools that you use to get to equity. If you're not doing great work with diversity and paying attention to your differences and increasing that, or belongingness and welcoming standards, or equality, making sure people are at least at par with one another. If you're not doing that work, equity actually doesn't happen. So I did want you to know that these are related words, not the same, but most of the focus today is around what we're going to do with equity. So what is that? Well, there's equity and there's racial equity. If you look at that second line, equity itself is about creating systems where everyone can thrive. People don't necessarily get the same things, but they get what they need. That's what, generally speaking, equity is all about. And the key word in that statement is systems. Equity is about systems, not your heart or your mind, but about the systems that we work, play, pray in, live in. Those are the systems. Racial equity is deeper than equity itself. It's defined as being just and fair inclusion into a society where all people, immaterial of their race or ethnicity, can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. So this is, you will thrive immaterial of your race or ethnicity. That should not be a factor in how you live, thrive, benefit in a society. I know you've probably seen that image at the bottom of the screen. It's not a perfect image. It's probably not the one I would draw, but it's got one thing on it that I want us to focus on. You've seen the image describing the differences between equity and equality. It's about giving people boxes so that they can see over the barrier. None of that really makes a lot of sense to me. The third frame makes a little bit more sense to me. I really am interested in us thinking about, how do you get out of the business of having to give a bunch of boxes to see over the barrier? Wouldn't it make more sense if we just talked about what the barrier was and get rid of that? So that third image really is about liberation. It really is about taking down the fence. So we should talk about fences. Fences are the barriers that are in place. They are the inequities that sit in every single community. Louisville has them. Everybody has barriers in the systems, because guess what? No system in this country was ever built with equity in mind. Not one of them. Not government systems, not healthcare, education, justice, housing, transportation. No system was built with equity in mind. Not only is that true, we also don't necessarily have a playbook for how you're supposed to build one, particularly since they're so linked together. So our job tonight on our first question is going to be this. I want you to think about the fences in your community. These are the barriers, the things that just get in the way. They're inside of our structures. They keep everybody from thriving. I want you to think about the fences we need to be working on today. So the next thing I'd like us to talk about, I just want you to use your voice in the same way that you just did when we were talking about how the pandemic's impacted you. I want you to name the fences. These are the barriers in the system that need to be worked on in the city of Louisville. That's the question. I want to open that up to the group now. What are the fences we need to be working on today in the city of Louisville?
So first in the queue is Katie Dickinson.
Hi, Katie.
Hi there. It's really great to hear you. I actually heard you for the first time at your church with your husband several years ago.
Awesome.
And, yeah, and then I work at the Colorado School of Public Health, and you came out and did a series for us there too. So I always learn a lot from listening to you. I would say, you know, the one fence that really sticks out for me is housing. I think that our housing in Louisville is, you know, has gotten very expensive. We have many areas that are, you know, single family zoned, and I think, you know, there's a tension between sort of our you know, holding on to our what we think our small town character means, and thinking about what barriers that maybe creates to welcoming people in from different walks of life.
Great. Katie, thank you so much for sharing. It's good to hear you.
Yep, there we go.
And your puppy in the background. Let's see if we have other comments about fences.
So no one else has their hand raised. Oh, Kavi is again with her hand raised.
Great. Go right ahead.
Yeah, you know, if I tend to jump in, but if there are other people, please ignore me and I will not be offended.
No, you go right ahead. We're happy to hear your voice.
So Dr. Tyler, I've seen you at the TED Talk, and I think even at the women, at the WIT, one of the meetings, I think, and one of those. You know, one of the things that I have realized, and I bring this up in most of the diversity and inclusion meetings, is a lot of times people tend to think that diversity is somebody who looks different, who feels different, or who talks different. And a lot of times I try to tell people, no, diversity is in the mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you can be the same color, but you're thinking different, right? And so being inclusive is what we need. That's my personal feeling. And I'm with NCWIT as well. And so that's what I encourage students to think about is people might look the same, whether it is, you know, coming from the same background, the skin color, or education, whatever it might be, but there are still so many differences, and kind of reaching across the aisle and talking about the differences and being comfortable talking about it, I feel is the key to being inclusive.
Thank you. So let me just ask a clarifying question. When you think about the fence, the fence for you, the lack of focus on inclusion, I want to make sure that I'm capturing the system that you think we need to be working on.
The fence that I feel is sometimes, you know, people think that they need to go and help, but they do not, and it's kind of making the assumption that somebody needs help. And that is what I feel that, you know, many a times that we need to not focus on that. That is probably a barricade. And instead of saying we need to jump in and help, it's like, is there a real problem? Or is this something that needs to be solved, or listening to other people? That is what I feel.
Okay, thank you. That helps a great deal. I appreciate your comments. I'm going to the Q&A box, and there are some comments there as well. I don't know that you can all see them, but housing has come up again. I know Katie shared about housing too, but there's another housing one. Public transportation, needing more routes, extended different hours. There are no local buses connecting to Highway 36, buses on weekends before 9 a.m. The next one that I see is we need to form an alliance, stay in communication, and work together to identify the barriers. What a great idea. This is called collective work, which is important in justice work. A huge one is city planning, segregated housing and affordable housing. We cannot just be a town with lawn signs and one march in June with real action. Identify from roots to tips in terms of the history of this town and where we're going. Our intentions are useless if we don't commit to equitable and inclusive change in this town. Access to high-speed internet, no matter what your income, is another one that came up in the Q&A room. So thank you for those comments too. Do we have anyone else that's willing to speak?
Keely is next.
Keely, thank you. Go right ahead.
One thing that comes to my mind is bias in education. And I know that there's statistics in Boulder Valley School District where Black kids in particular, and the study that I read, it's across the same socioeconomic level, and grades were still lower among Black students than white students. And so the fence there seems to be bias of teachers. And I was also thinking about offense being representation in our community, as maybe a lack of murals that have all sorts of different colors, or what about business owners in our community and those, representation or a lack of representation.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate, Keely, you raising the issue of bias. I know that came up when I was talking to Jorge as well. This issue of bias is something that we are going to have to tackle. And I always share that we can't just tackle the unconscious kind. We've got to tackle the conscious kind too. We're so practiced in bias because this goes back so far in our history that it has become our norm. So challenging that would be really important. I'm glad you raised bias in education as a fence. This goes way back. I want you to think about another level of this. I'm glad you were the catalyst for this conversation, Keely. But when we go back, I know I started the presentation telling you things like slavery wasn't that long ago. But there's some things about bias that are tied to that too, which is why we're talking about racial equity in particular. And some of you in the room tonight might know this experiment. It was called the 1940s doll test. It was done in 1947 as a sort of psychological and social experiment to figure out the impact of segregation on very young Black children from the ages of 3 to 7 years old. And so the test was, there was a Black doll and a white doll, and the line of questioning was like this: which doll is the smartest? Which doll is the nicest? Which doll is the most beautiful? So it was those sort of attribute questions. And overwhelmingly, these Black children that were ages 3 to 7 picked the white doll for the most positive attributes. So the Black dolls were meaner, uglier, dumber, those kinds of things. Now, I want you to imagine this for a minute. These are kids that are as young as 3 years old that were already developing a bias towards whiteness, and that white was positive at that young age. That was 1947. So I want to share that with you because I want you to understand the tentacles here. That tentacle goes way back to slavery, but we have children who now have grown up to be the adults who were that little boy or girl in that experiment that have what we call now internalized racism, which is you too own that bias about your own skin color. That is in our system as well too. So I want you to be thinking about that, because that is the gravity of what happens when we leave these biases in place, that even the people that are negatively impacted begin to believe that those things are true. So thank you, Keely, for making me remember that experiment. I think it's an important thing to talk about.
Next in the queue is Jennifer.
Thank you. Go right ahead, Jennifer.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this call. I'm still on that conversation around fences.
Yeah.
And I grew up in this area. I'm 50 years old. I've spent 49 years in Boulder in this area. And one of the things I see as a fence for many of us is sort of this idea that being colorblind is somehow the positive way to interact with people, that we don't notice that you're different. You're not different. We don't notice you're different. And so then we miss that people are having a different experience. It's almost like discounting what they're truly experiencing, not even recognizing they are experiencing something. And somehow that makes us somehow that's us showing they're equal, but really it's us not acknowledging that things are different for them. And I think that's a really big fence in an area that doesn't have a lot of diversity, where we try to pretend like we're all having the same experience. So that to me is a fence that I am finding I'm needing to knock over and learn a lot more, so that I'm not assuming that everyone's having the same experience I'm having.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. I appreciate you saying that. I think it is painful when people say, I don't see color, we're all the same. It makes, when it happens to me, it makes me feel like I'm invisible. I am different. We're not all the same. And there's nothing bad about that. I think it is what makes us great. And so to say I don't see it actually is code word for something completely different for me. I appreciate you raising the importance of that as a fence. I think it is a system issue.
Next in the queue is Kate again.
Okay, great. Go right ahead, Kate.
Thank you. There are 2 points I wanted to make and ask your for your input and the group's input, but they continue to be about city planning and housing. And I've been reading a bit of Richard Rothstein and about this, that really the root, not necessarily the singular root, but that racial segregation was, is in the design of our every part of our country. And recently, and I'm not sure if the city council has yet voted, but recently a developer has been proposing and asking for the city to vote on a huge amount of land that would drastically change our town. And kind of came in this tripod of a huge medical Fortune 500 company that's in the town, along with a huge piece of property owned by oil industry and one developer. And so, of course, there were good ideas, and some parts of it eventually, might be beneficial. But all I could see was, if we do this, we miss a huge opportunity. And the opportunity would be, hold your horses. Let's wait and find something that, as a town, let's use this opportunity to actually create our town with the commitment to make it. This is a chance. We can make this town an equitable place, like actually really walk the walk. I get real frustrated with when there isn't action, and it's all good. I think it's important, and great people are reading books and joining book clubs and watching movies, and that's all important information. And yet, if we don't take action, and I'm talking long term, that we change the face of this town and make this a truly welcoming place, not sit back and be so comfortable in the convenience and the knowing, oh, we're in this great place and we don't want to really change it or rock the boat. We'll rock the boat. This is the time. And the other piece to that that I wanted to mention, and then I'll yield, is just in terms of, without getting into necessarily the debate about police funding, but I would like to know and find out from our city the information about what our city's budget is, and compare the police department budget to other budgets, comparing police salaries to salaries of other city employees, and mental health and advocacy, and see how that balances. So those are the 2 pieces that I wanted to throw into the mix tonight.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for your time.
You said a lot, and it's all important. I'm glad you brought up Richard Rothstein's book. It's The Color of Law. If you all haven't read it, it's a great read on the tentacles that one system has to the other and how one system created the other system, which is what makes equity work so hard. Our systems are so woven intricately, beautifully, sarcasm inserted, together that it makes it hard to unwind them. The book talks about that, in particular, the impact of housing segregation to schools, and the poor performing schools were not accidental, for sure. So I like the fact that you've raised this, Kate. You bring to mind an important part about equity that I didn't talk about, and that is equity really is construction work. And in construction work, what you typically are talking about when you talk about equity is you're talking about dismantling systems. And that's about the only thing we talk about is what to pull down. What you just shared, Kate, is the other part of the equation that we better start talking about. And that is when you pull something down, you need to know what you're building. And it doesn't mean just move money from one place and put it somewhere else. That's not necessarily building something. What's the design process? And that design process is what we have got to start talking about. I think that's what you're alluding to is why not pause and think about what we might design as a new system so that we can bake equity right into it. That's the real conversations that I think cities and towns and organizations across the country are going to need to get in if they absolutely are working on equity. So thanks for raising that, Kate. So important. And where the money goes is a part of that design work. Are there other thoughts?
There's no one in the queue, but you might have some messages in the Q&A box.
Okay, let me look at the Q&A real quick, and then I think I'll move on to another questions. This person says the stories we tell about Louisville doesn't often include the full range of people who have lived here. Stories that emphasize one group of people belonging in Louisville often take up valuable resources. Example, representation in monuments, the limited space in people's idea and memory of Louisville to the exclusion of other groups of people who have also shaped Louisville and who have been excluded from Louisville. So remembering our past is an important thing, and not only remembering it, acknowledging it, having symbolism to it, very important. Not just acknowledging, but denying our experience. I thought we'd see the end of racism when Strom Thurmond and George Wallace passed on. What a shock to see so many bright, young, articulate, and overtly racist people in events like Charlottesville. How does that continue? That's absolutely right. I always share the story. I'm not a young person, but I went to the University of Alabama, and when I got to the University of Alabama, the Klan showed up to burn crosses because they didn't want Black students on campus. That was in the 1970s. So it's still alive. It always was. Illuminated, flashlight on it today. Let me shift gears. Keeping on some of the same themes that you're already on, this is the question I want to pose now. In your opinion, if you had the magic wand and you had to prioritize where we'd focus first to advance racial equity in our communities, what would your priority areas be? We've heard lots of ideas about the fences, but if you had to prioritize those fences, I've heard everything from internet access to housing. So you've got a big span of things that are fences. How would you prioritize? Give me your priority areas. That's what we're after here. Where would we focus our work? In what priority areas to advance racial equity in our communities? What's your thinking about that?
So first in the queue is Rita.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rita. You go right ahead.
Thank you. I was noticing we can't chat in the chat room, but I noticed that in the question and answer, someone asked Councilman Dickinson, how many people of color, what percentage in our community? And he says less than 10%. And that's very disconcerting to me. And to me, that's a priority area to ask the question why. And I think if we ask the question, we will find the fences of what we call affordable housing is not affordable to too many people. They don't qualify, or they make too much money but not enough to live in Louisville. Or education. I think for me, I really want to get to the root of why I've lived here 43 years. And I live in Old Town, and I've watched Old Town turn into a very white utopia, with nice little signs in the yard that talk about diversity, but I don't see anyone of color. And I walk around town. I'm an old person too, doctor. So I walk around town a lot. And the people I see of color are working in our yards or cleaning our homes. So I guess that's my big thing is, could we have a conversation and explore why there's less than 10% of people of color in Louisville?
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
that. I appreciate you just getting exact. That's exactly what I think council will need to have you say, is exactly what you think the priority area is. And what I appreciate about what you shared is you continue to say, and why, and why, and why. I mean, I was always taught you should be asking why at least 5 times so you can get to the root of the issue. So I appreciate you saying, let's just keep exploring where this 10% is coming from, what it's rooted in. Thanks for that. Other thoughts?
Next in the queue is Jorge again.
Okay, Jorge, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. I also quickly wanted to say that that experience that I shared
Yes.
is like less than 0.001% of the experiences that I've shared with the Louisvillians. Everybody has been very welcoming to me and my family, and it's a wonderful community to live in. I just wanted to make sure that I was fair
Thank you.
on that regard. But in terms of racial equity, I think COVID-19 like really has exacerbated the issue of underserved communities in terms of health and the environment. And I think that climate change is going to be significantly more disruptive than COVID-19. I can see, for example, regional haze issues. What's happening now, you can look outside. I can't imagine like in 40 years, regional haze possibly like making cities uninhabitable in these areas in the West. And so in Puerto Rico, for example, climate change, I work with the environment as a policy advisor to like cities and governors. And what I've been like telling folks to get ready for what's gonna come in 2070 came in 2017 in my homeland in Puerto Rico. And Hurricane Maria was analogous to having like 2 hydrogen bombs detonating in my homeland's energy and water infrastructure. And so the scale of the impact of climate change in our communities is going to be by far more than COVID-19, I believe. And so making our cities more sustainable, making our cities be more water efficient, making our cities help usher the change that we need to do in terms of clean energy to mitigate as much as we can climate change. I think it's going to be like one of the major tools to advance racial equity.
Thank you so much, Jorge. Thanks for expanding the conversation too with other, you named in many ways another fence for us to be thinking about, which is our climate concerns, our environmental concerns. I appreciate that. Thank you. Other thoughts on priority areas?
Kavi is back.
Great. Go right ahead.
Right. One of the things I wonder is, can we find ways to learn or, for people to be aware of the different cultures, the ethnicities, because a lot of times it's what we see on TV. That's kind of, what people focus on, right? And sometimes it's a lot of negativity that we see. So among, I know they said that it's 10% of the community is people of color. And in our neighborhood, our family is the only people of color, but we know the entire neighborhood, and it's about 100 houses here. So, and we try and kind of, you know, get to know other people, and they get to know us, and they know the different festivals that we celebrate and things like of that nature. Not that everybody agrees with us, right? And somehow finding ways to increase the awareness in our community, I think, would be a big help.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Next is Katie again.
Okay, great. Go right ahead.
Hi there, thanks.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, when we think about, I really appreciate the comment about climate change. You know, as I mentioned before, housing is up there on my priority list. And I think a lot of these things, I think one barrier is, you know, like actually the physical barriers or the, you know, the administrative barriers of like Louisville. And so we'll think about, you know, how to advance racial equity within Louisville, but not necessarily how what we do affects neighboring communities or how what neighboring communities are affecting us. Or so I think also, you know, just finding those opportunities. And I know that, you know, you know, that these conversations are happening where, you know, Boulder County is talking about affordable housing and how to do that, you know, at a county level or at a you know, at larger scales. And obviously transportation is another area where, you know, thinking regionally at least about this is really important. But yeah, I think also just finding those opportunities to you know, I guess, you know, these interlocking systems, right, and concentric circles of systems. So how does, you know, our little system here in Louisville, you know, not that there's nothing we can do on our own, but just thinking about how we can be more effective by trying to work collaboratively with other partners.
Yeah, thank you for that, Katie. You know that, Katie, I really believe in collective work. So that is in keeping with that. I appreciate you saying that. Let me just read a couple of things in the chat room and then we'll pick it back up. One of the things in the Q&A room, higher income residents have been able to hire tutors to provide or create pods for their children and the children of parents who can afford it. This only exacerbates the divide between social classes and educational opportunities. I missed that one. Discuss white privilege candidly and age appropriately with all students. What a loaded topic to talk about white privilege. I agree with you. I think we need to learn how to talk about it so that people actually know what it means. It creates, I think, such a defense mechanism because I think we have associated the word privilege to money. And if you happen to be a person that doesn't have money, then you can't hear white privilege. We have to learn how to have the conversation just like we're having the conversation around race. This comment is, I find it offensive and insulting that people here are continually saying that people of color don't live in Louisville because it's too expensive. That's a cop-out. Plenty of people of color are well educated and have excellent jobs. Maybe there's another reason they don't live here. Very good. We should not have a bias about why we think that. That was the question and the comment about really digging into the root of that. Why is it 10%? Teach citizens and act on the intersections of systemic racism and climate change. There's a question here. Are there any minority empowerment, financial equity, not just low interest, but low equity requirement funding opportunities for small businesses sponsored in Louisville and Boulder County? We have great community activities year-round. Are any of them sponsored or highlighting other cultures? Great comments, great comments. I'm going to move to the next. This is really the last, probably the last question before we get ready to wrap up. And that is, this is a hard one because this one's going to take a little thinking. What could city leaders do that would really make a difference in advancing racial equity? What could city leaders do? What's your thought on that? Any thinking on that?
I don't have any hands up, so if anyone wants to volunteer. All right, I'm gonna call on Jorge.
Great. Thank you. Go right ahead, Jorge.
Yeah, I want to. I really appreciate the city for making this platform available. Sometimes I'm a public speaker in the area of the environment and equity, and I've told this story. I never mentioned that it happened in Louisville, but the fact that I can tell this story here in Louisville, I think that allows me to not just criticize, but maybe try to offer solutions. And so I appreciate this opportunity. And I would say, in the context of my situation, I think ideally, you would want a police force that when they see a confident man, young man of color, I want them to be trained in a way that they look at him and say, look, there's a Rhodes Scholar. Look, there's the next president of the United States. Look at that young, confident African American woman walking in the street. She's gonna be the next doctor. I think that some type of like training for the police would be great, and I can share my experience to the police. I'm not afraid of doing that, but I think just providing this opportunity for everybody in the community to share their experiences is really important. One thing that Dr. Nita Mosby, I just quickly wanted to say that I went through that trauma just like that before George Floyd, with one of the last tweets against Latinos that President Trump tweeted, which I felt in a very guttural way, existential, deep way, that a lot of the experiences that I've had in terms of racism and profiling, now it was so public, that tweet, that it was done in front of my whole family. And at that point, I looked at the Republican Party. I don't want to make it into politics, but I think it's important for me to mention this. I looked at how many white men support Donald Trump, and I decided that I couldn't trust white men because they would lead a person to sow hate in my community very unfairly, for people to be labeled rapists and to come into your house to steal your money just because of the color of your skin. And I had to go and I had to engage after that trauma with my coworkers that were white. And I had to tell them, look, I'm so sorry, but I don't trust white men anymore. And then one of my coworkers, and she was one of the leaders of the Chicano movement, she looked at me and she said, Jorge, but don't you understand that in all the struggles that we've been through, we've done it hand in hand with white people. And there's another Native American leader my point of much despair. He said, if it not be for white people, there wouldn't be people of color in this landscape. We would have all been exterminated. And so I just wanted to share that story too. So people can feel proud of their heritage and understand that all the struggles that we've been through in order to perfect this nation, it's been done also with full support of white people throughout.
Yes. Thank you for that, Jorge. I grew up in the segregated South and the civil rights movement. It was, at least for a snapshot in time, collective work. I remember my parents marching, and there were white people marching with us. I was a very little girl in the marches, and I saw for the first time Black people and white people together. Even in segregation, we were together in that snapshot in time. And to your point, Jorge, I'm hoping that what we're in is not a snapshot. I do think we need to be hand in hand on the eradication of racism and white supremacy, and that we work together for justice together, all on the front lines of it, not some on the side and some in the front. Everybody's on the front lines because it lifts the whole boat when we do that. If we get rid of racism, everybody on this call does better, not just me. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you so much. Any other thoughts about what city leaders could do that would make a difference in advancing racial equity?
Next in the queue is Jason Hogstad.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Go right ahead.
He's been unmuted, but I'm not hearing him.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, now we can. Thank you.
I'm Amelia, Jason's wife, but we're on the same computer.
Okay, thank you, Amelia.
Yeah, I just was thinking, I wonder if there's, I think I would love it to see council and city leaders look at a way of integrating or incorporating equity into systems, right? So for example, I know we have the design guidelines. You know, we go through a lot of trouble to have really thorough guidelines in place for a lot of different considerations across all of our different commissions and boards and councils and whatnot. And so I don't know if there are models, you know, across the world or across the country that we could follow, but I do kind of wonder if there's a way to make this question of equity into a system. You know, how will this affect different people? You know, have that actually be one of our criteria for new buildings or for the historical commission, you know, something that will make this stick, this moment.
Like glue, stick like glue. Amelia, you're right. That is so critical that we think about how to get this not just to be an episode or an event or a project, but to make it institutionalized, baked right into the fabric of how we operate. That's what we're after here. Thank you for sharing that.
Next in the queue is Kate.
Thank you. Go right ahead, Kate.
Hi, kind of piggybacking on what Amelia said. We need, and I think I said this also in the Q&A, but I really believe we need an alliance, and the only way any change is going to happen is if communication continues. And I don't think we know specific answers because we're not there yet. What has to happen is people have to come to the table, stay at the table, and brainstorm. And I've lived in this city for 6 years, and one thing I've learned is that a huge strength of this city is coming together, voicing their opinions, and creating something, and in a pretty democratic way. And you know, there are a lot of open minds and big hearts and willingness. And so if we have an alliance that anchors the community with a voice, and it builds a bridge with city council, or maybe becomes some kind of umbrella by city council in some way. But I don't think anything's going to happen if we don't have some formed alliance.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to use the word committee because that just sounds clinical. You know, an alliance of, you know, we're trying to be allies. That's what you do, and that's right. And I think that's what most people here believe. Mm-hmm. So that, to me, that's just a must. It's vital. So thank you, and you're awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. And thank you for that comment. I believe you. I mean, I think my whole TED Talk was about that doing this in a collective is key. I think it's just unlike any other time in history where you could go off in a silo and get a few things done. We have a collective stake in how this turns out and how this gets designed. And I don't think we can afford to do it in silos. I certainly can't design what a system of equity is going to look like without you. I want you with me because I know together it's better. But I don't think that happens by accident. I don't think that happens because it's just our consciousness. I think it happens, to your point, when we form alliances or collectives or whatever the word is to describe it. When we do that, I think that's where the work really is born. I really appreciate that too. I'm looking at just in the Q&A room a little bit more. One of the comments is we want and need a diverse police force to start with. Go into the community, into neighborhoods, and listen to what people need. Many people will not access this opportunity on Zoom. I encourage our leaders to keep holding space like this, keep asking questions, keep reaching out, and continue this work. Let's talk about what has worked well in other places. Where are there examples of effective anti-racist, equity-promoting policies that we can learn from? City leaders should look for these examples and help develop a vision and roadmap for racial equity in Louisville. Also studying the whys, systematically addressing the barriers that we've started to talk about tonight. I believe there's a need for healing on an individual and collective level, here, before being able to move to solutions and actions. I can hear the different places in the boat that we are all on this call, and therefore the next step is different for different people, which makes this a very complicated process. And the last comment that I'm seeing here is, well, next to the last, baked into all decisions we make as a city should be a lens on equity and the planet. This event is a great idea. What would a truth and reconciliation process look like for Louisville and Boulder County? What great comments here. So I want to just go to this really quickly. This is a question I just want you to be thinking about. I want you to be thinking about, and some of you have already sort of talked about this a little bit. Amelia talked about this to some degree too. What would it take to more fully engage you in the process of advancing racial equity? What would it take to more fully engage you in the process of racial equity? It is the final reflective question that I wanted to leave you with tonight. And every day I want you to spend a little time, if you're not already, just thinking about how could you get engaged more? I always use the 20-60-20 rule in this work. I want you to know, even on this call, there might be 20% of you that are already all in. You're all in, you're already engaged, you're already doing anti-racism kinds of things, 20%. 60% of people are concerned, know this is important, but don't know how to engage. They don't actually know what they should be doing, and they want to do it well. So we've got 60% of the people that are tentative, care, and not knowing how to engage. And then there's always 20% that are not going to be engaged in this conversation or this kind of work. And I want you to know that that 20-60-20 stratification is what we're operating in right now. And an important thing for you to think about as a community is how you think your community is stratified. That 60% in the middle could be parts of your community that have been voiceless, not because they don't care, but they don't know how to engage in this place called Louisville. Or they could have engaged before and the outcomes might have been bad. There are all kinds of reasons why 60% of the people are tentative. So be thinking about that stratification too, as you think about how you might more fully engage in racial equity work. And then I thought I would share this with you. This is an interesting model. I didn't make it up, but it's called the race equity cycle. And it normally is defined around organizations, but those things that are around here in the perimeter, you could change to reflect parts of a city. And this middle cog is what happens in our cycle as we do racial equity work. You can be in the awake mode where you are focused primarily on increasing numbers of racially diverse people. So there are lots of communities and organizations that are just focused on increasing racial ethnic diversity. That's the awake cycle. And then there's the woke cycle. The woke cycle are where organizations, cities, or governments are evolving their culture to value all people's contributions. This is more along the lines of being inclusive welcoming, increasing belongingness. That's what the woke cycle is. And then there's the work cycle, which is a lot of what I heard you talking about tonight, which is where organizations, governments, and systems are accountable for addressing systemic racism and root causes of inequity, both internally and externally. So there's awake, woke, and work. We're going to be in all of those parts of the cycle. And that's how our systems work. Unfortunately, a lot of our systems got stuck in the awake system. They got stuck in the awake part of the system because that's what the diversity movement, affirmative action, and some of those systems in the 1970s and 80s rewarded us for. The more diverse we got, the better we were looked upon. So that kept us in the awake cycle. We know the awake cycle is not enough. We're smarter than that now. Doesn't make sense to have a lot of diversity if we keep systemic racism in place. So we got to get to the work part. And I think that's beautifully what you talked about tonight is how do we go from awake to woke to work and keep that cycle moving. This is a little bit blurry, but this is an example of what a racial equity kind of toolkit or framework would be. I'm not actually sure that I like the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but the reality is what's in the middle matters. We see it and we talk about it, we get ready, and then we do it. That's really the core of what this is. But if I were to talk about what your city council and mayor are talking about right now, and the reason that they've shaped this wonderful session together is that number 2, number 3, and number 4 are important in this moment. It's to collect voices and data and analyze what it really means, to understand the historical context of all of that better, and to engage those that are impacted. That's squarely where you are right now as a community, is in that area. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The more we can have forums like this to learn and grow together and hear voices that sometimes are whispers or silent, then the better. So that's fantastic. I heard lots of themes tonight. I know you did too. We captured lots of fences, a lot of ways to prioritize, but I wanted to wrap up with, if I were to put all of those things together, where some of your comments were subsets of others, I heard the following things. I heard that we need to get underneath the root of our 10% population of racial ethnic diversity. Why is it 10%? And not to stereotype or generalize about what that is, but to really find out what causes that 10% number. So I heard that loud and clear, and lots of things that lead up to that. I also heard that we should know more about places, spaces, systems where we're experiencing a lot of bias. We heard about education, but I also heard some other areas where there might be bias that's showing up in ways that you can do something about. I also heard loud and clear that you should be thinking about not what you are designing, but what you should be designing. If you dismantled systems that don't work for everyone, then what should you be designing? And is this a great opportunity in the community to do that? We heard a lot about transportation and housing, both because your community spoke and your community also typed in the Q&A similar things, that transportation, housing kept coming up, but administrative barriers, things that get in the way of these interlocking systems, are also things that we should be thinking about. Being systems focused is another thing that thematically I heard in lots of things that you said, that again, our hearts and our minds matter a lot. But here, when we're talking about equity, we really are talking about what are we going to do in the system. And so staying system focused was very important. And then lastly, a theme that I heard and read is this need to figure out how to keep working together, whether it's an alliance or a collective or whatever you want to call it, but to create an intentional space to go at this work as a community would be very important. Underneath all of these things were things like climate and representation increasing diversity and understanding it and honoring it. Almost everything that you said fit beautifully under those themes that I heard. I want to thank you for such a healthy, wonderful conversation that I think is just the beginning, but you've already shaped up even some priority areas that would be really important to the community. I wanted to end with this, and then I'll hand it back over to your wonderful city council and mayor, that this quote, I made it up, but I believe in it. I want you to know that the goal in all of this is not for you to be perfect. If you think you have to be perfect, you've already lost in this work. The goal is for you to be excellent. Excellence still gives you an opportunity to learn and grow together and even make mistakes, and it's okay. That's our goal. So don't let anybody tell you that you need to be perfect at it. Remember, there is no playbook for equity. We're actually crafting and architecting that playbook as we go. I thought I'd also just leave you with this slide, which is just some of my favorite resources. Some of them are books down at the bottom, but the top 3 are actually websites that I leverage a lot to get case studies and examples of what racial equity work actually looks like. Because we talk about it a lot, but to see what it looks like is quite another thing. And so Policy Link in particular, if you've not gone to that website, has case after case, city after city of examples of how racial equity work looks in real life. So I wanted you to at least have that. So I'm going to wrap it up now. We're about 3 minutes left. I didn't leave very much time for the end, but I do want to allow an opportunity for any closing thoughts and then get you into your evening. Thank you so much for your participation. This was so great. I'm so honored I was able to do it. Now we have to figure out who I'm handing it off to.
Well, thank you. This is Mayor Stolzman again. I am really moved by the comments of the community and the leadership that you've helped guide us and take in this information. I did want to give folks a chance if they had any other questions or comments like you asked for, and we don't see any hands at the moment. So if any people have any closing comments they'd like to add, please do that. All right, and again, I'll turn it back over to Councilmember Lay or Councilmember Dickinson. Thank you so much for getting this conversation started for us. I mean, collecting this information, like you said, is critical to figuring out our next steps and to understanding where we need to go as a community. So thank you to everyone for participating, and thank you for helping us to start out this dialogue.
Thank you,
Councilmember Lay or Councilmember Dickinson, did you want to make any closing remarks?
Just to say thank you so much, Doctor, for leading this tonight. Very challenging and exciting conversation. You elicited some really fantastic input from the community that I think I've taken a whole bunch of notes tonight. I'm glad I had my mute button on, or you would have heard me tapping away, as I heard a lot of good comments. And we're going to be doing this again in a few weeks on the 16th, and you'll be back with us. And I'm really looking forward to that. And I think we hopefully will get another group of people or additional people to come and join with us. But this has been a really good opportunity, I think, to start this conversation.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
You too. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.